Good evening. I'm John Bailey. This is People to be Heard, the program where people who have something to say have their say. And tonight, you've got Dr. Joseph Ricca, Superintendent of Schools of White Plains, and Dr. Debbie J. Hand, who is Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction in the White Plains School District. And we're here to talk about assessments, because you were coming up on doing a presentation to the school district, and this is just timely. We set this interview up several weeks ago. So right now, after the scores have come out of the new Quasar-prepared 2018 ELA assessment test last spring, how did White Plains 3rd to 8th graders do?
Well, John, it's great to be back.
Yes.
Thank you so much, and I think you're right. It's a prime opportunity for us to talk about assessment. Assessment is something that takes place each and every single day in our schools and in our school district. And you know, sometimes folks think that it's only one time a year that there's assessment happening, and that's the New York State standardized assessment, the high stakes test. Of course, that's not the case. It's constant. But we do talk about the New York State standardized assessments this time of year because, generally speaking, we receive the children's scores back. So the question of how are our children doing? Our children are doing great. Kids in the White Plains City School District are continuing to shine and continuing to prosper and meet success in the classroom each and every day. This year is a little bit different when looking at our standardized assessment scores. You know, it's one measure, and it's interesting this year, right, Dr. Ham, because when New York State released the scores, a little late.
Well, they were a little late.
They were a little late.
They were a little late.
Very late, actually.
They were very
3
late.
months late.
Very late. Yeah. So when they released them, we learned that the state education department didn't want us or advised against comparing this year's outcomes to last
year's outcomes because of the changes that they made in the testing format. It was a 2-day test as opposed to a 3-day test, and they recalibrated the scale score, so to be able to compare them wouldn't be something that you could do.
I see.
But we can still answer the question that you asked, because looking at our internal scores and looking at our local assessments, we know that our children are continuing to progress.
So let's see, the way it works out is in ELA, 55% did not pass it, and 45% did, of grades 3 to 8. And in the math, 59% did not pass, and 41% did. Now, how does that strike you?
Well, the first thing I'll say,
that?
when we talk about passing, is the first thing we talk about, because really these assessments are not a pass or fail endeavor. It's really supposed to be about growth. It's supposed to be about a child developing academically year over year over year to eventually achieve mastery, and by the time that child graduates high school. So, you know, when we're looking at students in grades 3, we can't think of it as a finished product.
No,
you know, absolutely, right? So as they move forward, you know, we look to continue to see those cuts or the scores rise, but we also understand that that's going to be a work in progress. Added to the challenge that the cut scores change.
Yes.
So it's hard for a school district to really know the extent to which students are progressing.
Could you explain what you mean by a cut score?
Well, a cut score is a scale score, so they take the raw scores, they convert them to scale scores, and then they have a range of scale scores that match a performance level. So when you're saying passing, I'm assuming that you mean students that have scored a level 3 or a level 4 in the exam. So depending on the number of raw score points that you get, multiple choice questions would be 1 point, short constructed responses could be 1 point to 2 points in value. I think sometimes maybe even a 3-point value question. So the points are added up, converted to a scale score, that's converted to a performance level. The interesting thing is students that score in the high level 2 range they answer many questions that are very rigorously stated correctly. So I think that, you know, really looking at it from an individual basis and where a child is developmentally, and then looking at that performance level and seeing and taking that performance level and making the data meaningful. You know, what standards did the child perform well on? What standards did the child need extra support in? So it's not really that pass-fail look.
I see. So is the new test, you feel the new test is better?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, better. We think, we were talking about, we think that the fact that we're moving in the right direction, that's the state education department has listened to the field, you know, the folks who actually do this work in terms of the length of test, the amount of time children are focusing on taking the assessment. Also, and I think this is a critical point, involving teachers.
Teachers being able to look at the questions, look at the passages.
Right.
I think we're in the beginning stages of that. I think that's something that needs to continue in order to make the test better. You know, the questions are very important. Right now it's an untimed test, which sounds great, but an untimed test for children who have difficulty managing how long they're spending on, you know, reading passages and answering questions or working on math and showing their answers. I think that there's got to be some kind of, you know, a level that helps a child to pace themselves as opposed to just making it untimed.
So we think it's definitely moving in the right direction.
Right.
I would also add, John, that having teachers involved in the creation of the test items.
Yes.
You having been a teacher yourself.
Absolutely.
Yes, right.
Absolutely. You know, we need teachers to be involved in the creation of test items. We need teachers to be able to see the constructs of the items so that they're better able to fashion their instruction in the classroom so that children aren't surprised by the construction of test items when they're
test questions.
Right? You'd hate to see a child not be able to answer a question just because of the way it's put forward to them.
Yeah, I was that kid in many tests going like this.
You know, wouldn't it be great if you could actually ask a question of somebody during that period and say, hey, you know, excuse me,
could you
what does
explain
this
this to
mean?
me?
Right.
Or, you know, I'm having difficulty understanding how this is meant. Not to give answers away, but I think it's just such an unauthentic
clarity. I mean,
environment to take a test.
We were talking about this. Imagine if you you were in a very important job, right? And you had to make decisions every day. You had to decide on choices for your job, and you weren't allowed to ask questions.
Like what the acronyms are.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
The acronym is the bane of the communication age.
That's
True. What did that mean?
I mean, I run through this every time I get press releases and all sort of stuff. But you have seen the Quasar ELA and math assessments, and are you confident that our grade-by-grade in-district testing shows White Plains are reading and counting at grade levels beyond what they show on the assessments?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, 7,000 children, I think there are certainly going to be areas for us to improve upon. We have children who are at all different developmental levels, regardless of what grade we've put them in, right? Because we kind of have constructed this school system that says when you're 5 years old, you're in kindergarten.
You belong here.
When you're in 6th, you're in
But that's
first year.
really parent-driven. Nobody wants their 5th grader in with 4th graders or their 6th grader in with 7th grader. Yeah.
But the educators in the classroom recognize that each one of those children that are in the classroom are at a different learning level. So, you know, it's really important to focus on the individual child. So, and that's what we do in the district level. State can't do that. There are too many kids in the state.
And our assessments, they're standards driven, they're standards aligned, and they're also curriculum aligned too. So those are our internal local measures are a better measure of student progress and student growth, I believe, at this point than the New York State exams.
Right. Are we actually moving towards such a quasi IEP plan for each student?
Well, you know, so you talk about the acronym, right? An individualized education plan, and when the inception of that, of course, with special education. But you know, when you think about it, every one of us is unique, and every one of us really needs some type of an individualized educational plan and trajectory. So, you know, what teachers have been doing without necessarily using that acronym is they've been learning about their children, learning about where the strengths lie, where their weaknesses are, and then supporting them and scaffolding their instruction to move them forward developmentally. So really, without using the acronym, most of the children that you encounter are experiencing an individualized education in some way.
So I think if you look at standard assessments as giving you a different set of information, not the only information, then they make sense.
Well, isn't really the assessments a public relations thing for the state education department?
When you bring it at that level, then
because
then it's a deterrent.
Gee whiz, I mean, they took so long to show that these then tests improved that it's
Well,
and then you can't tell, well, why did they
So
improve?
we can't talk about it.
Yeah,
We're not
right,
allowed to
yeah.
talk about the test. We can't read the test. You can't see. And then think about this, right? We're supposed to use, and let me say this in all fairness to the state education department. I know that they have a big job to do. But if you're thinking that you're going to utilize these outcomes to then fashion a child's educational plan for the following year,
Right.
well, you can't. We got them in October, John.
Yes.
School's
No,
well underway.
It was, I could not believe it
Yeah.
because Quasar was there the whole year. They should have really done a better job working to get the things out on time.
You're always going to have a better picture of how
Yeah.
your child is progressing in school
Yeah.
at the local level. Always.
Yeah.
By talking with teachers, by staying connected to what's happening in the classroom, by being involved in the child's educational experience, including homework and the like projects, you're always going to know.
What's the difference in content between the White Plains grade-by-grade assessments and the state assessments we saw last spring?
I think, to tell you the truth, I think that sometimes the questioning is different for the students on the state assessments. They're very rigorous assessments. Sometimes they, in a math situation, they would combine multiple concepts in one question. I think it's also the unknown of a child sitting in front of a standardized test, as Dr. Ricca was alluding to before. Children are used to working in a very social learning environment. They work in groups, they communicate, they ask questions, they help each other through questions, and then you have them sitting in front of an exam that is very rigorous. I will give New York State the credit for saying that they have
You
developed.
don't think it's an
rigorous
easier test?
No, it is not an easier test.
No, if
It's a-
anything,
Well, that
we're
is good to
asking-
hear.
if
No one
anything-
has said that publicly.
No, it's not an easier test, and if anything, I think one of our concerns and what we've heard from teachers in the classroom is that because it's standardized, right, and there is no such thing as a standard child, that the level of rigor and developmental appropriateness, could really be an issue for some students. So you might not be getting the best look when you're using this particular data point, which is why it's so important to have multiple measures when asking questions about student performance.
Right.
Yeah.
I
Do-
think they've
yeah.
worked on making it fairer. I think that they've worked on having teachers look at the questions, look at the passages. I don't think it's making the test easier. I think that they are trying, to the greatest degree possible, making it more child-friendly. Are they there yet? I wouldn't say so, but from what we see.
Definitely
Well,
working.
should have some sodas and have their iPhones in there, and then they feel comfortable. But has the state? Do you agree that Pearson created assessments in ELA, which were described as too long, too difficult, not appropriate to grade level, were exactly that? Did you feel the Pearson tests were as bad as was pointed out?
They were absolutely. They absolutely were not appropriate. They absolutely were developmentally inappropriate. And listen, we saw that from the get. We said that from the get-go. We were concerned about the rollout because we knew that this was a corporate designed testing platform that really had no no connection
But
with the
Europe
classroom.
uses it.
What's that?
Europe uses Pearson almost exclusively.
Well, I know they're a London-based. I think they're a London-based company.
Yeah.
I don't know to what extent they're
Well,
high state
they are
standardized.
supposedly, quote, the best in the business.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is
Supposedly.
that might be a line they
But
developed.
so that is
I think it
intriguing.
was also asked how they were asked to develop the New York State
Yeah,
test.
that's
You know, what parameters were put on that. I mean, having passages that were much higher lexile levels than students were reading in their particular grade level that were aligned to, the standards-based grade level work, and having children take an exam at their frustration level, I don't think is giving you accurate information.
It
about
panics
children.
you out. is
No,
what it
and
does.
John, we have to come back to the question: why are we doing this?
Well,
Right.
it's a
Why-
good question. Do we
why
need
are
it
we doing
anymore?
it?
Or are we
And
doing it for
millions
students?
and
Are we doing it
millions
for our
and
kids?
millions of tax,
Yes.
millions of tax dollars,
Yes.
hundreds,
A lot of
thousands
jobs,
of
though.
hours.
A lot of jobs, though.
Well, I mean, I'm sure, but you have to.
But,
If what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that our students are graduating school at the highest levels possible, then investing and making sure that our children have all the supports they need to develop healthy is really the way to go.
But actually, our graduation rate is considerably up now. If I, you know,
Our graduation rate is
it's up
fantastic.
over 80% in time.
In White Plains?
In White Plains?
Oh, at White Plains High School, we were around 96, 98%.
96% within the 4 years.
Yeah.
That is really.
Yeah, I think when you factor everyone in, it was even out of district placement, it was around 88% or something like that. It's phenomenal. Our kids are doing great.
Right. So now you've indicated that you are going to move forward to better tests in the 3-8 areas, and you alluded to that with individualizing them more. What are we doing in that regard? How are they going to change?
Well, I think, you know, what Dr. Hand and our faculty and staff members, who by the way, are just tremendous. These are some of the best teachers that you're ever going to meet. They're making sure that their instruction in the classroom is appropriately rigorous, that it's individualized and differentiated, and that it is focused on the standards, right? Because we know that these standards are what the children are being tested on, so it needs to be the focus of
this year's standards, anyway.
This year's standards, right?
And our department, our departments have worked on quarterly assessments, common assessments, so that we can, you know, track progress by cohort, by grade level, by student within each subject area.
You came to us from Elmsford, where you achieved some terrific advances on a very diverse and complex district which had not performed well. And so what do you feel this is the key to doing it? The more individualized instruction?
I think supporting teachers. I think supporting teachers in the classroom. I think supporting our students. I think making sure that folks recognize that while this assessment is an annual event, that it is not the end-all and be-all of student performance. And at the same time, making sure that our children and our faculty members have what they need in the classroom to be able to teach, to learn, and then to move forward and develop.
And making sure that our children are receiving a well-rounded education, that they are learning concepts in science and social studies, and they are experiencing field trips, and they are having experience with music and art. I think all of that is extremely important.
Because we're talking about here, you know, we're only talking about English language arts and mathematics. What about all of the other amazing disciplines? What about all of the other fantastic things there are to learn and to know? The questions, we were talking earlier, you know, it's more important to ask the questions sometimes than to have the right answers. These are topics that we focus on in our classrooms every day, not test, prep, drill, and kill.
That's very true. But we have to realize that people have the answers, but they're not thinking over what questions should they be asking themselves. Right? Now, the commissioner of the New York State Education Department, Mary Ellen Elia, I think her name is, indicates the new test results that African Americans and Latinos are doing better, which was a real reach, in my opinion, the way she interpreted those results, but that's just my opinion. Though still well behind white students, how are we doing in White Plains on the, quote, achievement gap, which was supposedly narrowed about 10 years ago to within like 10%, and now the gulf is sad.
The advent, I think, unfortunately, about 10 years ago, or maybe even longer, with No Child Left Behind. That's maybe 20 now. Some of the policy that was put into place, I think some of the unintended consequences of that is it actually reignited our concern related to the achievement gap, because we started to see the gap widening again. I respect the commissioner and her assessment. I still think the gap is far too wide, and I think you do too. In White Plains, we expect that all of our children will be performing at the same level. So any gap for us is something that we simply can't abide by. And you know, I think there's a question, and we were talking about this as well. Why, right? We have to ask why, and then we have to start considering: is there a flaw somewhere in the assessment? Is there you know, something that we need to be looking at more on top of the instruction and on top of the experience and on top of you know, the development of our kids?
Yes, Dr. Han, you come to us from the Terrytowns School District, where you were a superintendent for curriculum and instruction. Before that, you also were an elementary school principal, and you were a principal of PS 166 in New York for 4 years.
Yes.
A very diverse school district. What do you see bringing to the table for the minorities in White Plains?
I believe you have to have high expectations for all students. And students are individuals, so you really need to, teachers and principals, they need to see their children, their students as individual students in their school building and really work to meet each child's needs and to, you know, if it's a child that needs language development, or vocabulary development, or extra support in mathematics, we do all those things. And then if a child is performing at a particular level, you know, you're not going to be able to see that growth by seeing a level 1 or a level 2 on a math or an ELA test, but looking at a reading assessment or a reading inventory and seeing how that child has grown as a reader and where that child has to work on skills to advance as a reader. Those are the important things, and we have those in place in the district.
One thing I have noticed, having lived in White Plains all the years, my daughter going to the White Plains school system, there is a much higher degree of confidence in the Latino and the African American students, and self-respect,
And self-respect and
on
leadership
the whole,
skills.
okay, on the whole, than which is an exemplary to the way they're treated by the school system. I just had to say that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
We're so extraordinarily proud of every single one of our 7,000 plus children.
They work so hard.
hard.
They work so hard in the classroom.
And they are doing so many great things. John, in fact, for the viewers, if they haven't yet, they could visit our district's website and watch a new video that highlights some of the tremendous things that are taking place in our classrooms. And you really, you come to recognize that there's so much more to a school district.
Does the educational channel have a student-produced news show?
We have student-produced newspapers. We have student-produced news segments, student-produced blogs. I bet there's a kid doing a podcast somewhere. I know we have amateur meteorologists. There's all kinds of amazing things.
They should create something like that.
They should, yes, absolutely. And I'm sure
Instead of a student newspaper,
a student news channel.
they should have a student newscast.
Yeah, I know we do. We
That's a
work
good
with the
idea.
Zone at the library, and they do some pretty great newscasts over there as well.
Right. But be that as it may, that's just a thought for the future. But now, where's the district going? Now that you've been here about a year now, right? You've settled in. Where are you going to take the district now? Curriculum and instruction.
We've been focusing mainly on student engagement in the classroom, on making sure that we are infusing STEM into our curriculum. We have Project Lead the Way that's been moving up through the elementary grades. We have a strong dual language program that we're going to be working on to make even stronger. There are opportunities in the middle school and the high school to continue that pathway of dual language. We had, I think, over 30 students last year receive the seal of biliteracy on their high school diplomas. Those are exciting things for us, and really, you know, diving deeper into civics education, social studies, and science, and while also increasing, you know, our
literacy.
financial literacy.
You really, you know, there are just so many things for our children to take advantage of, and then on top of that, of course, all the extracurricular and athletic opportunities.
And the socio-emotional learning opportunities and support that we were giving children.
Yeah.
So brief snapshot on grades 3 to 8. Did you see success in the elementary grades that encourages you?
I believe that third grade test scores are encouraging. Fourth and fifth grade really stayed stable if we could compare them to the last year's test, which we're not supposed to compare them to the last year's test.
Can you not?
I know you can't. You have to. It's just nature that you do.
Yeah.
And our middle school grade levels are really making strong gains. We're very proud of the
Yeah,
gains
I think
that we've
the
made.
sixth grade, do you feel the sixth grade academy is working?
There is something very special about being able to come together as just sixth graders in one building and make that transition together from
That's
elementary to
Eastview
middle school. Absolutely, yeah. You know, when you're in a building as a sixth grader with eighth graders, there's a different feeling. When you visit Eastview, you can tell that the level of stress in terms of peers is diminished as the children transition. And remember, for those folks who don't remember middle school can be a real challenge.
Junior high school was terrible. Periods, being bullied by the 8th graders, and so
well, coming out of 5 elementary schools, it gives a nice opportunity for a cohort of 6th graders to get together, build community, build that camaraderie, then move on to Highlands for 7th and 8th grade.
Their performance is much better since that 6th grade academy was initiated. And so that is it seems to me that the progress is being made, and in about 5 years, do you feel it would be a good target to make the progress you want? Like, what do you feel would be a realistic target to shoot for within 5 years as far as passing on assessments?
Absolutely.
Stuff like
I mean, well, we're always shooting for 100%, right? But we also recognize 100% is perhaps unrealistic. But each year we're looking for increases between 2 and 5%, dependent upon the stability of the assessment. See, that's the challenge for us, right? So when the cut scores change, or when the curricular or the standards change, it's like moving the goalposts in the middle of the game.
So generally, you don't know exactly the standards by which an actual position on the test is achieved.
Well, we know the standards now, but if in 4 years the standards change and the tests change and then the cut scores change, it becomes difficult to measure. But we're going to keep pushing. And, you know, for us, really, we look at graduation rates, we look at student satisfaction and community satisfaction, parent involvement. There are so many measures by which we can take a look at whether or not we're being successful.
And I think losing sight of the fact that that is one measure and it's measured in that particular way, you have to put the whole package together. I think you have to put it all the pieces together to really come out with something that, you know, you say that, okay, this is where we want to be, and this is our vision for success for our students.
Okay. Well, Dr. Joseph Ricca, Superintendent of Schools in White Plains, Dr. Debbie Hand, Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction. I have trouble with those big words. You have been heard.
Thank you, John.
Thank you both. John Bailey, good night, for People to Be Heard.